Hey people, today I'm going back to the 30s, specifically 1933. I'm going to be looking at a recipe found in this super awesome book called The Chemical Formulary, which has a whole bunch of stuff from recipes to making explosives to making varnish for a deck to making embalming fluid. For my purposes today, I'm going to be trying to make something called flash powder or flashlight powder, or some people call it like magnesium powder. In my case, I'm going to be trying to follow the recipe to as close as I can get using what I have. So I'll bring the recipe up. First off, it requires magnesium powder. It also requires sulfur, potassium permanganate, potassium nitrate, magnesium oxide, and charcoal.
So here's that recipe straight from the Chemical Formulary book. Notice that some of the components have variable amounts that you can add. I personally will be shooting straight down the middle, or at least trying, with all of these ingredients.
So thankfully I have all of these ingredients. I have magnesium, but unfortunately it's in a ribbon form, meaning it's like, kind of hard and circled around itself. So I'll have to convert that to a powder somehow. I actually have sulfur in my mineral collection. I have potassium permanganate, as I've used previously in my elephant toothpaste video, and you should definitely watch that if that sounds interesting. I just ordered potassium nitrate because, as a chemistry YouTube channel, it's difficult to not deal with potassium nitrate eventually. Magnesium oxide, I can make that from magnesium, no problem. And then charcoal. Yes, I have charcoal too. So in this video, I'm going to try and be careful with not only making this flashlight powder, but also acquiring all these materials, because I'll be working with some metallic dusts and stuff, and I'd rather not breathe that. I breathe enough bad stuff at work. And I'll also try to be careful with lighting this thing. So let's make it and see how it turns out. So here is my source of sulfur today. It's a sacrifice from my mineral collection that I'll probably do a video on later. But sulfur actually exists in a cyclic molecule naturally, which is S8. It's like this 8-membered ring of sulfur atoms. And so this is about 7 grams or so, and I'll need to grind it up if I want to use it effectively. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be using to measure my masses. This is an old school balance here. And to start, you're going to want to make sure that this is on 0 and this is on 0. And then this is straight exactly on 0. And so how we use this is, say, if we want to measure something that is 5.1 grams, we'll adjust this to 5 and then this to 0.1. And then what we do is then you add enough to here until the needle on the left reaches 0, and that's 5.1 grams of mass. So in my case, I really don't need that much. And I don't know if I've ever measured this much on this balance before, but I'm only going to be going for about 20 milligrams, which only puts me here or so. And so you'll notice that the needle is a little off balance. So I'm going to take, say, the sulfur, and I'm going to try and rub off some of the powder into this basin until we hit the mass we want. And that's working pretty well, actually. Thankfully, I don't have to use too much of my sulfur. And the problem is when you bump it, then it kind of messes up for a little bit.
And so I've sped this process up just a bit, and at this point my garage, where I do all my experiments, was beginning to smell a lot like sulfur, which has kind of a foul stench to it if you haven't experienced it yourself.
And I would say that's probably about 20 milligrams of sulfur right there.
So you can see there's some larger chunks
that have formed, and so I'm going to have to grind this a bit more. This is my mortar and pestle, obviously used to grind things. It's a bit dirty on the inside from a project I did actually back in high school. I've had this for a while, yeah. So I'm going to dump my sulfur in here and grind it around a little bit. So you can kind of see that there's some sulfur at the bottom there that's been finely powdered now. So we'll just have to collect it and continue on. So I've put it on this aluminum foil sheet just to have a nice flat surface so I can add it later, but here is our 20 milligrams of sulfur. Here is my source of carbon today. This is anthracite coal, which is kind of a higher end version of regular coal that maybe would like power a train or something. You can see this 35 on here. This is also from my mineral collection. That's just a label. Hopefully I don't have to use all of it. But this has the highest carbon content of any form of coal. And so this should do the job once we powder it. Okay, so now I need about 30 milligrams of our coal. So I'll set this to 30. And away we go. Okay, that's not scraping very easily. I think what I'll try is using some pliers to maybe clamp down and just break off larger pieces. That makes a lot of coal dust. See, that's a bit too much there, so I'm going to remove that large piece that just came off. Okay, and that's probably pretty good there. So you can see at the bottom there, that's all the carbon that we've obtained from this coal here. So we'll dump this into the mortar and pestle. And grind away. So this is what it looks like at the bottom here. You can see that in the process of grinding, there's kind of like that shimmery effect that you see with like a lot of pencil lead, and today pencil lead is not actually lead, it's just graphite, which is pretty close to what we just did. So I may have to add more coal to get the actual powdered form. Okay, so here's our carbon and sulfur mixture here. I've added them together because the order of addition doesn't really matter in this case. We're going to add them at the same time anyway. So here's my setup to get magnesium powder. Magnesium comes usually in these strip forms, and I just don't have the powdered form on hand, so I'm going to try to powder it myself and collect it in this box. And I haven't opened this just until now because magnesium will spontaneously oxidize over time in the air. So I'm going to try and filing it down with this file I actually bought for building model battleships, but that never came around to anything. Okay, this is not going anywhere. Okay, so next I'll try my belt sander here. And I don't want this whole thing to ignite since magnesium can burn at high temperatures, so I'm just going to test this on a small piece.
Now it's quite easy to look up the auto-ignition temperature of magnesium, which of course I had at this point. It's just that I've never belt sanded it before, and so I was a bit nervous going into this. Now, if I were to do this again, I know very well that magnesium is probably, definitely not going to combust on me.
Okay, so I've clumped magnesium kind of into something more grabbable here, and let's try this out. I need to wear a mask. Alright, well, I'll try just grinding it on sandpaper.
I started off by trying to grind that small strip, but I eventually moved my way up to just grabbing the entire roll and jamming that right into the sandpaper. Now, I'm also wearing a mask during this process, so yeah, I was getting pretty sweaty because this took quite a bit of physical effort. I would say in total, I was probably grinding for maybe like a solid 25 minutes to try and get all this magnesium dust. So in the future, I'm definitely gonna be saving myself the sweat and tears by just buying the powder itself. And at this point, I'm just hoping that this amount is close to or just enough of what we need for this step.
Alright, let's try pouring this out and measuring how much powder I just made. Alright, let's see. Okay. Darn it. Okay. So that's about less than 500 grams. So we're at maybe 400 milligrams or so I gotta keep going.
So, big sad face, back to the grind. The roll was actually starting to unravel a little bit at this point, so grabbing it became more and more difficult, unfortunately. But I eventually got all that I needed.
And here's another 350-ish milligrams of our magnesium powder, so this should be sufficient. And here's our bounty of magnesium for the day. This is probably around 800 milligrams or so, which is just what we need. It's got a little bit of that red sandpaper mixture in there, but I would imagine it's probably pretty benign, so I'm not too worried about that. Okay, so now I need magnesium oxide, and I really don't want to buy that just for this one experiment, so I figured I'd make it myself, which is pretty easy. All you need is a little bit of magnesium, and we just have to ignite that. So I'll just do a little bit right now and see how my aluminum bin holds up to the high temperatures that magnesium burns at. Okay, so it already looks like it's melting the aluminum, which is not a great sign. Okay, I'm thinking I should just do this on the steel. Okay, we've got our magnesium here now. Let's try lighting this. Okay. Okay. Try a bit of a larger piece since that one kept blowing around. There it goes.
So at this point, I started to notice that there's actually some smoke, like substance rising from the magnesium, which is something I definitely did not expect, considering the combustion of magnesium just forces oxygen to it. And so I've cut the audio sense, but At this point, I'm scrambling to unplug the fire alarm so that I'm not waking anybody that's nearby.
So here's our magnesium oxide, which is white, and there's still a bit of magnesium in there, I think. So I'm going to try and put this in my mortar and pestle and grind it up and see if I can get some good separation of the two compounds. So now I'm just going to measure the approximate amount of magnesium oxide that we need. I'm going to say about 120 milligrams, which puts us about here. And to avoid the larger pieces, now that I've grinded it, I'm just going to add it by the spoonful.
I actually became pretty surprised of just how much magnesium oxide I actually had produced. It really didn't feel like I had made that much. But I also did 3 different batches of burning it, so I ended up having almost just exactly the amount I needed.
Here's all the magnesium oxide we need in its powdered form. And I'll just go ahead and add it on top of the magnesium we already have. Okay, time to add our potassium nitrate.
I added a bit too much in the first scoop, so I had to remove it slowly over time to account for that.
And lastly, we'll add a friend, potassium permanganate.
There's something satisfying just watching that needle slowly rise in fast time. I don't know if it's just me.
That's pretty good. Okay, so now we've got all of our components separated and ready to mix. We've got our potassium nitrate, our potassium permanganate, we have our mix of magnesium dust and magnesium oxide, and then we have our carbon and sulfur mix.
So I brought my ring stand to just outside my garage to lower the possibility of me burning my house down. And for the first time, I have a second camera pointed on me, which is super great, right? I just wanted to make sure I got the shot. And now I'm mixing the ingredients together as per the instructions from the chemical formulary book, being very careful about it. And the first thing I tried to ignite it with is just my standard lighter. And I'm being quite careful, really not trying to either look at the powder when I'm doing this, as you can see, or also keeping my distance here. But it really was not sufficient to light it, unfortunately. So I moved on to my propane burner, and I really gave it the go. And eventually, here's that again from a different angle. Wow. And here's it in slow motion, just so you can get the wow effect for even longer. You can see there's like a plume of smoke that actually rises up. And here's actually a screen cap of my favorite moment. You can see there's actually shadows being cast against my neighbor's guardrails there, which is pretty funny. And after it was smoldering, I tried to ignite any remaining magnesium that was left, and I got a couple pieces, but definitely a success there.
So thankfully, I've recovered from seeing spots. and I've since cleaned up the mess that the residue of magnesium oxide and whatever was left behind. And I definitely learned a lot. It took a lot more effort to ignite than I ever thought possible. And I'm still standing, so this was a success. I may return to this later someday and scale up this process, because I would love to at some point, maybe when I have more cameras or something, to get more angles and kind of a better field of view of like how exactly bright this is being. But for now, I'm limited to my 2 cameras, and with everyone's support, then eventually I can reach that kind of stage. And speaking of support, thank you so much for tuning in today. Every subscriber and every view means so much to me. I'm just a guy trying to teach a online class about explosives and distillation. So I like to think of all of you and subscribers as kind of being people in a lecture hall that I happen to be the professor in. So it really makes my day when those kind of things happen. So to continue that, it would really help me out if you were to like and subscribe, as well as share with anyone you think that might also be interested in my content. So anyway, that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.